Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Sorry for the delay, but as always, new technology defeats us in one form or another. Welcome to this new venue as well, which is very spacious, so feel free to move around at your ease. We're not as constrained as we usually are. My name is Councillor Ian Wingfield. I'm the chair of this committee, and before we start the meeting, I just have a few housekeeping announcements to make. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening. So if you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is in St. John's Churchyard off Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area, and please switch off your mobile phone to silent whilst in the meeting. The code for accessing the Southwark free Wi-Fi is clearly displayed all over the place. This meeting is being live streamed to the Southwark Council YouTube channel via the Zoom platform. A recording of this meeting will also be viewable on YouTube after the meeting has ended. May I remind members to raise your hands if you wish to speak. And please wait until I've given you permission to speak before contributing. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot, or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the Council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. I'll now start the formal agenda proper. The first item is apologies. Apologies for absent have been received from Councillor Victor Chamberlain and also Councillor John Hartley. They're both unwell this evening, so if we can send them all our best wishes for a full and speedy recovery. We don't have any other apologies, do we, Everton?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I'd just like to go around the table and confirm who the voting members present are this evening. So I'll call everybody's name first for them to identify themselves. Obviously, I've already introduced myself. Councillor Von Wieser. Present. Councillor Albacca. Thank you. Councillor Cumbo. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Lamb. Councillor Newens. Councillor Altree, Councillor Pollock. And we have two of our education cooperative members who I'd like them to introduce themselves.
Martin Brecknell representing the Anglican Diocese of Southwark.
Thank you.
Marcin Jagodziński, parent governor representative.
Thank you very much indeed. I now move on to item 2, notification of any other items of business which the chair deems urgent. There are no late items. The minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October 2022 are contained on supplemental agenda number 1. Item 3, disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare an interest or dispensation in respect of any item on the agenda at all, please? No, thank you very much. Item 4, minutes. Can we agree as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October 2022? Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I also just want to take the opportunity to just bring members up to date with the Scrutiny Improvement Review, which the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, as you're aware, have been undertaking for a couple of months now. They're still in the process of compiling their report, so hopefully it'll be available in the new year and we will circulate it to members as soon as possible. Okay, move on to item 5, which is the cost of living crisis. As members will recall, at our last meeting in October, we received an update from Councillor Stephanie Cryan, Cabinet Member for Communities, Equalities and Finance, on council initiatives and funding to support residents in response to the cost of living crisis. For this meeting, myself and Irina, the Vice Chair, thought it would be pertinent to hear from the groups who gave community evidence at the July Council Assembly in respect of the cost of living crisis, to hear how things have changed since they gave evidence at the July meeting. We also thought it would be useful to hear about the impact of the cost of living crisis is having upon mental health and well-being in particular. And finally, I have invited Councillor Cryan, lead cabinet member, back to give that update on how things are rolling out since approval of the cabinet report in October on Southwark's response to the crisis. I intend to take invited guests in order as listed on the agenda. And so firstly, could I call upon Steve Hedger of the Albrighton Community Fringe to come forward and take a place at the table. Welcome, Steve. Thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody for being in attendance for at this meeting. So you have up to 7 minutes to speak, and then we'll have some follow-up questions. So it's all yours.
Right. Okay. My name's Steve Hedger. As I'm sure some of you will know, I'm chair of East Lodge Estate Tenants and Residents Association. Those of you who've been around for a few years will know that we've had some tussles with the council over in particular the regeneration of the estate, but eventually we buried the hatchet, and as I'm fond of saying, we are all winners. The estate has a fantastic regeneration, which I thank you all for. And as part of that regeneration, we had a new tenant hall built, which was Albrighton Community Centre. The centre was bigger and more expensive than a lot of tenant halls around the borough, but it has allowed us to flourish as a community. And it's benefited not only the estate, but the wider community around us. One of the services that we introduced at the community centre was Albrighton Community Fridge. The Community Fridge was a concept introduced to the UK by the environmental charity Hubbub, who piloted the fridge in Swaddling Coat in South Derbyshire, and then convinced that the idea was sound. They approached Southwark Council and hoped that the first community fridge in a network of 500 could be started here. And we were the first of 500 community fridges across the country. At this point, I'm going to heap praise on our housing manager, Robertson, who isn't here tonight, but he had the foresight to recognise a great idea. And he contacted us, we liked it, and Albrighton Community Fridge was born. The fridges were started as a means to reduce food wastage predominantly from supermarkets and also through the wider food trade as a whole. Food that's past the community fridge is often past its best before date, but still perfectly edible. Or sometimes simply it's just got damaged packaging and therefore can't be used or sold. All we do is we wash it, we spruce it up, and then we pass it on to people that actually are in need of food. That's pretty much how it started, and that's how it worked for quite some time. And then lockdown came along and changed everything. Whilst we've retained the ethos of reducing food waste, the principle of open access, we're entirely driven now by the need to provide food to people who are otherwise not able to afford it. This week we'll provide food to over 1,000 people. We'll make over 150 collections from food stores, some large and some not so large. Today alone, we've collected over 3 tonnes from 6 stores, and we have a further 9 collections this evening. In addition to collections in stores, we are incredibly fortunate to receive very substantial amounts of food donations from individuals, community groups, schools and other businesses. And again, so far today, we've received over 1.1 tonnes of donated food, in addition to that we've collected. We're both incredibly fortunate, incredibly grateful to receive these, and it's a testament to the generosity of the community we live in that after such a sustained period of difficulty, day after day, we receive an enormous amount of donated food. Demand is high, and it's estimated that this Christmas, 1 in 5 people will need to access food from food banks over the holiday period. We anticipate we'll provide approximately 400 free Christmas food parcels this year. The value of the food contained in these food parcels for a family of 4 is approximately £75. So that overall cost would be £30,000. Much of this cost will be covered by food that's donated to us, of course, but not all. Fresh fruit, vegetables, fresh meat and poultry and dairy produce will all need to be bought. The community fridge and other similar food outlets such as ours are all that separate a substantial number of people from going hungry. The soaring prices of gas and electricity are forcing people more and more to come to us for help, and more we're seeing people who no longer have access to electricity to cook food. It follows, therefore, they have no gas or electricity to wash or heat their homes. The situation since we last spoke to you, it has got worse. It's not drastically changed. It's been a slow progression. More and more people are just tipping over from being able to just about to afford to support themselves to just about not to be able to support themselves. And what we're seeing over a prolonged period is people are coming to us needing more and more as other household bills are increasing. Their ability to afford food is getting less and less. One of my big concerns is that we have no surety over our supply of food, but what we do know is that we will still have the same number of people and increasing number of people who are completely reliant on us to provide them with food. It's a precarious and it's a dangerous situation. Today we got a lot of food in, tomorrow we may get less food in, but we still know there will be the same numbers of people coming day after day that are needing food from us. And it's that lack of surety of supply that causes us a great deal of worry and anxiety. We know that people are going to come. We don't know that we've got the food from them. And if we don't provide them food, we know that for many of them, there is nowhere else for them to go. One of the important aspects of what I said is that we provide open access food. So we don't require people to provide any proof of benefits. We don't require people to only come a certain amount of times. We don't require people to live in a certain catchment area. Anyone can come to us for food. And what that means is that we're picking up a lot of people that can't access food from other places. And if we don't have that food, then there is nowhere else for them to go. During lockdown, we were having people coming from Hammersmith, from Wimbledon, an awful long way across London, at a time when they shouldn't really have been travelling because they didn't fulfil the criteria to get food from other places. And the community fridges, we weren't set up to do what we're doing, but the way that we've been set up means that anyone can access the food, and that at the moment it's understandable with the demand there is for food that people are putting in place conditions for people getting food, but there will always be people that can't meet those conditions and they are still going to need food. More and more we're seeing we've got the large influx of refugees that have come across to us at the moment. We certainly don't want to provide them with help, but they are drawing substantial resource from us, and it's not being replenished from anywhere else. So I don't know what the overall solution is, but we do need a more robust system for providing people with food. And one of the things that we have done, the point of me making clear that we're a tenants and residents association at the start of the presentation was that there are many tenants and residents associations across the borough, and I know that a lot of them would like to help. We were very fortunate and we were slightly ahead of the curve, and we had got a food delivery mechanism in place. I know that others would like to, and all they need is a little bit of support and help in doing that, because I think the more of us that there are certainly lots of places we can go to get food, and people tend to be very generous in their local areas. The more fridges that there are set up, the more places there will be for getting food, the less distant people have to travel. And if one fridge hasn't got food, the more places there are for people to go to get food. And I think we need to look at opening up more places that people can access food and resourcing those places a little bit better. And that we're doing everything we can, but I think we are working with you, and I have to say we've had fantastic support from the officers that we're working with, but I think there needs to be more of it, and there needs to be a more kind of strategic approach to how we're going to address the problem together, really. I'm not sure if I've gone over time there. My apologies if I have. But...
No, sorry, we'll take it off the questions. No, I'm joking. Just one thought springs to mind in what you've just said. Are there any particular items which are very short in supply that you need more of?
From the stores that donate food to us, we get quite a lot of fruit and veg and bakery items, and they are kind of at the end of their life. So the difficulty we have in sending food parcels out to people is you can't put that food in, because if you want the food to last a week, it doesn't. But if people are coming in to collect and that food is perfectly adequate, so they can collect it to cook on that day or the day after, that's absolutely fine. So depending on what we're doing, Christmas, for example, is a nightmare because you've got to provide food for a substantial period of time. We get quite a lot of sort of tins of food that are donated, and people traditionally give more like long life foods really. Where we really fail, I think, is on dairy produce. And I know not everybody eats meat, and there's questions about whether meat is a healthy diet, but for a lot of people, meat and poultry does form part of their diet. We don't get a great deal of that. So for example, this Christmas, we're very fortunate one of the local schools is going to donate, I think, between £6,000 and £8,000 to us, going by what they've donated last year and the year before. And this comes back to how fantastic some people have been to us. So we will use that to pay for the meat and some of the fruit and veg for the Christmas boxes that go out. But without them, we would be entirely lost.
I'll throw it open to questions, or might as well go this way around the table.
Thank you very much. Steve, two questions, if I may. The first one, sort of practical nature. You said you get donations and you also collect from supermarkets. We have loads and loads of hospitality companies in the borough. Do you collect from restaurants as well?
We do. What we tend to try not to do is the north of the borough. There are fridges and there are other food outlets in the north of the borough. So what we try not to do is go into other people's kind of territory, really. We've got quite a good collection mechanism, and we could kind of hoover up food from quite a large area. But what we try not to do, for example, there's a community fridge in the north of the borough, and they have quite good connections with Borough Market and a lot of the restaurants things in the area. So we try not to go into their territory to take stuff away from them, but we do. We collect from restaurants. We have a lot of film production companies that also donate to us, where they do adverts, and there's the food in the background or whatever. We get food from them. We get them from restaurants. We Brindisa, have the delicatessens and restaurants. They donate quite heavily to us as well. We get food from the restaurants at Harrods, who's another one of our donors. There are a few other restaurants that kind of donate to us quite regularly as well.
Thanks. And secondly, in terms of what the council can do, I mean, would you say that the situation now is as bad or worse than it was during lockdown? And if so, is it maybe now time to access some of the emergency funding that we had during the lockdown period?
I would say that it in some respects it is better. There are probably less people at the moment that are coming to us, but we kind of anticipated when lockdown was over that the numbers would kind of drop down to pre-pandemic levels. They never did, and they are going up and up again now. For example, the challenge we've now got with people that don't have gas and electricity, it's very difficult to feed a family with food that doesn't need to be cooked for a week. I mean, you can give people pot noodles, but that's not a staple diet for people. So there are kind of different challenges now. During lockdown, I don't want to use the term overrun, but we had a very, very substantial number of volunteers. And that gave us a lot more flexibility to do things. We were able to deliver food much more easily. We were able to collect food much more easily. We had, people wanted to get out of lockdown, really. So people wanted to volunteer. We're struggling now to have the number of volunteers we need to keep everything running to the level that we do. So that's much more difficult now than it was. So there are things that are better, things that are worse.
So sorry, just following up on that. So is volunteering and organising volunteers maybe something that the council could help with? Is there anything else in terms of practical help that we can do now?
Getting volunteers is a huge challenge, and if the council can help us to do that, that would be fantastic. What we're finding as well is that we had volunteers that would be able to work all week, or volunteer a week, but work a week, or work a whole day or a number of days. What we're now finding is people are coming to us and they can only work 2 hours because it's fitting in between work. Their employer will give them a little bit of time off, or they've got a bit of time here and there, which obviously we're very grateful for. But For continuity, it's great if you can have people that are working all week. It's a luxury that we've never had before. That only came up in lockdown. So we understand obviously the reality of the world, but again, that's another challenge. Having many more people doing a lot less hours requires a lot more coordination as well. So that's another difficulty too.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I just want to remind members that we've got a lot of evidence to hear this evening, so I'd appreciate it if we could keep our contributions to a minimum. And also remember there's other members in the room besides ourselves. So Councillor Ottery next, please.
Just a quick question on your numbers. So correct me if I'm wrong. So 350 households every week come through your doors, about 700 of those being adults, 400 of those being children. Are you able to kind of shed some light on what those figures have kind of how they've changed over the past few months, particularly as, you know, the cost of living has begun to bite a bit more?
I think we used to have a lot more people that were kind of older. We periodically do a survey, or annually we do a survey about who's kind of using the fridge, and it used to be that we had a lot of people that were in the 50 to 60-year-old age group, and we always remarked on it because at that point in life you should be settled and you should be at your most stable. What we're seeing now is that it's got much younger. We're getting a lot more people with children coming in, and we always had a lot of disabled people, and we still have a lot of disabled people. We have a much higher incidence now of refugees and asylum seekers. We've got I think we've got 46 Ukrainian families that come to us. We have a number of Afghans as well as people from the refugee community, a sort of smattering from the rest of them. But 46 Ukrainian families is quite a substantial number of people. Our numbers work out usually, I think it's 3.2. An average family size for us is 3.2 people. So that's quite a lot of people coming extra every week. And we did have quite a large influx of Latin Americans during lockdown because of their situations. A lot of them were in lower paid jobs, and those jobs just disappeared during lockdown, and there was no they had no fallback. They disappeared, and what we're starting to see now is that they're starting to come back again, because they're the people that are they were on the breadline, and they're working, but they're not earning enough now to actually support themselves, so they're coming back again now, which is, it's nice to see them back in one sense, but it's also the reason they're coming back is not nice at all. It's very sad that they're in that situation again. So that's one of the differences we're seeing.
Thank you, Councillor Pollock.
Thanks, and I salute everything you do. I remember doing a couple of deliveries during lockdown from the Bevan's Community Kitchen, and it was very busy down there. Really just sort of focusing in really on what the council can do to support the operation there. We've kind of touched on the possibility of helping to coordinate volunteers, which might be something the council can get involved with. You mentioned about certainty of supply of food from supermarkets. So that's kind of the big one, really. I'm interested, firstly, to know which supermarkets are not providing certainty of supply. I know obviously the Sainsbury's across the road has been a big contributor over the years. Do M&S get involved? Co-op potentially? So who are they? And there would easily be a role for the council or maybe the local member of parliament to broker a kind of framework agreement with those supermarkets to make sure that they are providing that certainty based on the demand that you're getting.
All of the major supermarkets donate either to us or to somebody else. I mean, as soon as we find a new supermarket, we're on it to try and get them. And invariably now some of the chains insist that when the supermarket opens, they've got a food collection partner in place. There is only one chain that I know that doggedly does not do it, and that's Iceland. They send all of their surplus food. So an apple that's a day out of date, they send it to make biofuel. We've argued that that's not green. It's not, burning perfectly usable food is not a green option. So that's the only chain that doesn't, to the best of my knowledge.
Councillor Johnson.
Just a quick question, and obviously thank you very much for what you do. I've seen the queues outside your hall, so it means you're doing a great job in terms of helping your community. It's something you said earlier on about having more TRAs maybe open their own community fridges, and I think for a lot of them it's the fear and not knowing what to do and actually being time poor. So I was wondering, in terms of the support you've had so far, are you in a position that you could potentially open your space to mentor other TRAs and provide them with the support and assistance to do it if that's what they're able to do or want to do?
Absolutely. I mean, we have got a lot of people. Hubbub send a continual stream of people to us for exactly that. And what I would say is Hubbub are absolutely fantastic in the support they give. There's a like a little instruction guide of exactly what to do. Environmental health in Southwark, who have to license it, are fantastic. When the pilot was done in Swaddling Coat, the environmental health were much stricter about everything. Here, they've been incredibly pragmatic about everything and worked with us and been really, really excellent. Hubbub, if you're opening a community fridge, Hubbub will completely lead you through everything. There's instructions on everything. It's so easy. It is incredibly easy. I know when we first did it, we were terrified, but it is so easy. It's so easy, and it's just common sense. People run their own homes, and you know what's good and what's not, what you can eat and what you can't eat. It's just common sense, and I mean it's so easy. I mean, ours has completely gone haywire, but you know that's of our own doing. Really, you can operate them much smaller, and you can be as big or as small as you want to, but it's so straightforward. That's the bubble burst. It's like
Great, thank you. We've exhausted our time, I'm afraid. So
okay,
thank you for coming this evening. We appreciate everything you had to say.
thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Can I now call on Sophie Wellings and Ross Diamond from Link Age Southwark and Age UK Lewisham Southwark to come forward? I understand you'll be making a presentation, Ross. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, far away.
The last meeting, our colleague Cathy Duplessis from Southwark Pension Centre was here, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Copsins Consortium of Older People's Charities in Southwark. So context, everyone is clearly aware of the cost of living crisis and its impacts on the community. Just wanted to start with some stats about why it particularly affects older people. The Age UK London recently produced some research which showed that 25% of older Londoners live in poverty. That's compared to just 18% in the rest of the country. Older Londoners are 50% more likely to be experiencing food insecurity than those in the rest of England. 44% of older Londoners living in social housing are in poverty, and 20% of Londoners in their 50s are in fuel poverty, compared to just 15% in the rest of England. So this crisis we're seeing across the country is particularly challenging for older people here in London. What we're seeing locally at Age UK, Lewisham and Southwark, and with our voluntary sector partners, is much higher than usual requests for support, and particularly around food provision, which we've already heard about, but also with income maximisation, where we work with people to make sure they're getting all the benefits that they're entitled to. And just for services generally, people, if you can't afford to socialise, it's more valuable to go to a community space where there's sort of entertainment and activities that you can access free or very cheap. The most common concerns we hear are about food, because inflation is hitting food faster than other bits of people's budgets. Utility costs are less often mentioned, but we know it's a huge worry for people. It's just easier for them to talk to us about food more generally. So the local responses that we're making in Southwark is largely through Copsins, is through the contract we have funded by Southwark Council for the Older People's Hub, which we call Aging Well Southwark. This includes provision of advice with advice workers that can help people 60 plus to make sure they're getting all the benefits they're entitled to. It also funds befriending, a wide range of activities, including exercise classes, IT classes, and the shared central hub, where we have Age UK staff sitting with council staff, taking calls from older people, and making sure they're connected either with council services or the wide range of services that both we in Copsins and the wider voluntary sector can provide. Additional work specifically around the cost of living crisis includes a series of campaigns we've undertaken with the Council's Finance Service and colleagues from Citizens Advice Southwark, particularly around pension credit, which is a very widely underclaimed benefit, but it's also a lot of the announcements that the government made about the additional payment for older people is passported through getting pension credit. And we know it's a hugely underclaimed benefit. So we're doing lots of work locally. And we do know that, that since the summer campaign number has gone up of people claiming that. There's another deadline coming up on the 18th of December. If people claim pension credit by then, they will get all of this year's additional funding. There's another £900 coming out next year that will only be available to people on pension credit. So we haven't got the deadline for that, but we'll be doing another campaign at that point. We've also been working with Southwark Council on its cost of living fund, which really helpfully Southwark is allowing voluntary organisations and TRAs and others to make referrals in. It's a very simple system with a cash first approach. So people will be given a voucher for exchanging for £100 in their nearest post office, which works very well. And certainly as somebody that works in Lewisham and Southwark, Southwark's system is much easier and open to us in the voluntary sector, which I think is a really positive thing. We're now working on a range of warm spaces in Southwark, which are the kind of conversation emerged from discussions we were having with Councillor Evelyn Ikoto earlier in the year. We knew the difficult winter was coming. We hadn't yet had Liz Truss and her fiscal event, which made it so much worse, but we did know it was coming, so at least we had something in hand. We know that older people, including local older people, have been spending previous winters travelling on buses just because it was somewhere they could be out of the house and warm. We know people are choosing between heating and eating, all of which is shocking given where we are in the world. So the Warm Spaces Initiative is a way of opening up lots of spaces across the borough where people, mostly older people, but certainly in our Age UK centre, if somebody is not an older person, we would welcome them in anyway, where people can go to spend the day to avoid having to use their own heating, both in terms of the heating, but also cooking costs and so on. The funding was pulled together really quickly with the council, working with the United St Saviours and Southwark Charities. We work with Partnership Southwark and have been planning this for some time in partnership with Community Southwark, my colleagues at Age UK and other organisations working with Southwark Council. Southwark libraries are now dedicated warm spaces. They've traditionally made that offer, but haven't always been recognised as such. That we know people will spend their days in libraries there to be warm and have something to read. Cultural institutions are part of this, including Tate Modern. And small grants have been given with this funding to a range of voluntary community groups across the borough. The priority was given to groups so that we had a really good geographical spread across the borough, but also so it was groups that already existed that could get up and running very quickly. So we had a number of people coming with offers that said either they have a space or volunteers, but not both. And the funding was focused on those that already had space and volunteers and potentially staff to help run it. Some of them are opening longer hours. So some are doing evenings and weekends or additional times in the day. Other people are adding different things. So our Yielding Healthy Living Learning Centre that we have at Age UK, what we're adding to our offer is that people will get a free meal they can take home and heat at home. So we provide lunches when people come in, but they can take something home and heat when they get back to save on the cooking costs. Others are opening completely new services. So this thing called London Senior Socials is now opening on Saturdays at our other Age UK centre where they weren't opening before. Tenants and resident associations are hoping to access Southwark's gig grants to open similar things. So we hope there'll be even more. There's a map you can find on the council's website and also on the Community Southwark website, which shows where all the services are and exactly what offer is open at each of them. We're just really beginning to roll out the publicity, which kind of really sort of launched last week. Centres are slowly opening up. Publicity will continue with the weather forecast for much colder weather this week. We think the numbers will increase more. The monitoring is very light touch. So what we're looking at is the monitoring systems that United St Saviours and Community Southwark normally do, which is very light touch, but we're working with a council officer who is contacting some of the groups regularly to give us an update. So we've got the first one that's come in today on the use. So this is based on just 9 of the services. So we picked a small group So 9 of the services to date have seen 468 people, 347 of those were aged 55 plus, 194 were from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, 140 of those were people that weren't known to the service provider before. So we are seeing new people coming in. We're looking at this data, and if we see there are gaps, so if we see that, say, the Latin American community isn't being well served, we'll try and find somewhere in their patch where they would go and try and get some Spanish and Portuguese groups to lead some of those. The last bit we're doing in terms of this is we've got Age UK has received £10,000 from this budget to provide warm bags. We've only gratefully received a better name than that. It sounds very enticing, but we're taking warm bags to people who can't get to these warm spaces, either because they're housebound or have other difficulties getting to them. These will have things like microwavable wheat packs, which are like safer version of a hot water bottle, gloves, non-slip socks that people can wear, thermal cups, hot chocolate, activity packs, calendars, leaflets around home library service, falls prevention, thermometer cards, and a range of information about the Age and Well Southwark service, which is open to any older person. We can put them in touch with a range of other local services. We've got around 600 bags requested so far. I think it's probably since I wrote that's now 700. They're going out to people like the Home Library Services, taking them out, Council's finance team, but mostly it's through the voluntary groups that we know where they're in touch with people who can't get to the warm spaces. So yeah, I'm here speaking on behalf of Hopkins, and Sophie is with me to take any questions with me you may have.
It's lovely. Thank you very much for making that statement. Just one thing occurs to me, and I'm very pleased when you mentioned about the hubs and working with the council on that, because there is also a complaint that the older people are, that the less digitally aware they are in terms of using digital forms, et cetera, and being technology literate. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, it was a huge issue during COVID because services were pushed online. So, some of the day centres were closed for obviously for the lockdowns, and we found that older people really struggled. So we distributed lots of free phones donated by Hubbub, and it's mentioned again, and others, and tried to find ways. So sometimes we were standing at the end of people's kind of driveway by their door, shouting instructions about how they could use the smartphone we donated to them. So yeah, getting online was really difficult, but what we really noticed when we reopened the centres is you can physically easily tell, generally speaking, which of the people coming back had online access at home and which hadn't. They were physically healthier, fitter, in terms of people with cognitive impairments, dementia and stuff. You could see that the pace of change had really increased for those who hadn't had that regular face-to-face contact with people that they knew. So it's a huge issue. With the warm spaces, it's really practical. The worry is these warm spaces become incubation centres for flu and COVID. But the fact that the idea is that they're spread across the borough geographically, so people should, in theory, be able to get to one near them, so it can all be done face to face. And then while they're there, so we've got activities, we've got information advisors going in, supporting people in a range of ways, so they can get face to face support.
Thank you, members. Yeah, Councillor Tree.
Just one question on pension credits. I know that there's been some research done that notes the fact that women are more likely not to claim for pension credits and therefore end up in worse forms of poverty than men. Is that something that you're seeing as well? And if so, what do you think can be done to kind of target our efforts to help support those women who are older to get them to come and claim what's rightfully
we
theirs?
tend to see more women than men, partly because women live longer than men, but also because women are braver and more likely to come and talk to us than men. So we have to generally speaking, make additional efforts to reach out to men to get them to engage with voluntary organisations. Yeah, I know. So I'm saying generally it's the other way. With this one, I've not been told that's a particular issue that we're seeing, but we know that pension credit take-up is a real challenge. People feel it's very stigmatised. People don't like to claim. We have to do a lot of work to say this is money you're entitled to, you've earned this money, paid in for this money, it's for you. So there is a big stigma about it. It's also really difficult to claim. We had the pensions minister come out to see us last year, and this is back to the question about digital. We support a lot of people to claim it. In theory, you can do it yourself, either online or by telephone. It's really difficult. We introduced the pensions minister to one of our members who was doing, I think, a PhD in anthropology, having spent his career as a merchant sailor. Very, very clever, capable, confident man. He needed our support because it's really difficult. We showed the pensions minister this and said, why is it so difficult? And that was theoretically why he'd come to see us. We were hoping that the DWP and local authorities and others have the data about who is entitled to it. You know, we want it to be an automatic thing. If you're eligible for it, you should get it. But that's not the way it's gone. With the telephone service, we know if you do it by phone, you get asked for more information. So people claiming by phone have to provide 3 months worth of bank statements, which is apparently the point at which a lot of claimants say, I'm not going to share that information with you for all sorts of reasons. So it's really difficult to claim. It really shouldn't be. My colleagues from Citizens Advice may be able to tell you more about the clients they see, and particularly the gender issues. But yeah, it's a really, really underclaimed benefit that makes a huge difference to people. And because the government's pegged some of these specific winter payments to it, it's really important that people claim.
Thank you. Councillor Newnes, please.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on the point that you made about the possibility of the warm spaces becoming incubation hotspots. I wondered whether there is any sort of, whether the service that the warm spaces are providing is in any way dovetailing with with some sort of medical provision, and particularly, I suppose I can imagine that you don't want to turn it into sort of some sort of centre to, you know, that people are put off by the fact that it's urging you to do something which you've decided not to, although they, you know, hopefully people will be urged. But I wonder how you feel about sort of, you know, having some kind of encouragement for people to be vaccinated, both on flu, COVID, and yes, and generally sort of if that is working with that medical provision.
So we would absolutely give information about those things. I know Citizens Advice are talking about possibly having vaccinations in some of their road shows because people are coming while they're waiting. There's a good opportunity for them to get flu and COVID vaccination. The way the warm centres work, and I don't know if Sophie wants to say something about yours, but they'll all be slightly different. So we would talk to local pharmacists in one of our warm spaces and see if they could come in and do that. I don't think that's actually planned at this point, but it's certainly something we've talked to them in the past about, the regular day centre members while they're there. But yeah, the warm bags will have information about a range of stuff, and that should cover vaccination. So we would do, you know, at our centres, we would always take people's temperature. All the staff have to do COVID tests at least twice a week if they're working full time. We have big spaces so that, you know, the problem is with ventilation. We know a lot of it's about airflow, which is going to be tricky in some of the smaller spaces in winter. But yeah, I don't know if you want to say something about how you manage that, Sophie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. We wouldn't sort of have medical people on site, but I think the advice and information piece is a really significant one. We have a newsletter that we send out every 2 months to all of the service users on our database. And we, all through COVID, we put information about COVID, we put information about vaccinations. We've carried on doing that. And when we did our service user survey recently, which we do each year, and we send it out to all our service users, and we get about a 30% response rate. 98% of our service users were vaccinated, which I was really proud of because it felt like our messaging is getting through. So by having people come through the door, you're able to sort of have those conversations and provide people with important information. 98%. Yeah, it's great.
Okay, Councillor Pollock.
Thanks. Just a quick one. What do many people who approach your service find themselves sort of challenged by their housing costs? In particular, just I'm conscious there's a chronic undersupply of older people's housing and demographic trends that suggest that's going to get much worse over the next decade, and it's always a struggle to get the powers that be to bring forward sites for older people's housing. So I just wanted to know what the picture was your end.
Yeah, short answer is yes. We used to do a lot of our information advice service, used to do a lot of work around housing, but now what people present with is the emergency, which tends to be the income maximisation issue. So rather than deal with the causes of it, but yeah, housing is a huge issue in terms of overcrowding, people living, particularly during lockdown, with multiple generations in one household, which created some tensions. And strangely, the statistics for domestic abuse went down during lockdown, and I still don't really believe those figures, because it just doesn't feel likely when you've got, say, 2 or 3 generations living in a house together and not being able to go outside, and all the tensions that we know that financial abuse has gone up in recent months as a safeguarding issue in Lewisham and Southwark, just because people are in need, so you're more likely to steal from your mother or your grandmother in the flat. So housing is an issue. Again, since the advice are here, they may be able to give you more detail on that. But yeah, housing is always a huge issue that we deal with.
Okay, we're out of time, but I'm in the generous mood. I'll allow Councillor Cumber just a quick question.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about an issue that's obviously been quite high profile at the moment, which is the question of damp. And I'm assuming that, as with the tragic case of a young child who was unfortunately killed as a result of living in substandard accommodation, there must also be issues with older people who are more likely to have respiratory health conditions. Are you seeing a rise in that, given that people can't afford to heat their homes?
Again, I think Citizens Advice may be well placed to answer that. I'm not aware we've seen specific issues around damp. There may well be a spike, given that people have seen the publicity and thinking, actually, this is something I should take more seriously. Because I think for a lot of people, they've just thought, well, that's how it is. So it is an issue affecting older people, but it's not something that we're seeing in big numbers particularly. But yes, Citizens Advice may have something different to say.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your presentation and response to the questions this evening. We appreciate you coming. Thank you. Can I now call upon Chris Green, the Chief Executive of Citizens Advice Southwark, to present for 7 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm with Tim Clark, who's at the Council Assembly in July, and I'll be in. Sorry. Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting us to speak. We're at the forefront of dealing with people's money worries and are in a good position to see the ongoing impact of the cost of living crisis. Since July, the number of debt inquiries has continued to rise, and within this, there have been noticeable increases in fuel debt, council tax arrears, and rent arrears for council tenants. However, the most significant trend is the increase in inquiries relating to energy. In 2021, this was only 2% of all our inquiries, and this year it's risen to over 13%, and it's only now behind benefits and housing in the top 3 of issues that people come to us with. Housing issues are also continuing to show a steady increase, and are currently running to about 90% of all our inquiries, and within this, inquiries linked to homelessness are increasing. Which is another symptom of the cost of living crisis as people fall into rent arrears and face eviction. There are also significant numbers of people seeking our help in relation to disrepair, both in council and the private rented sector. In August, we undertook some research on the experience of people renting privately in the borough to better understand the issues they're facing, and the single most common problem cited by nearly 250 people who took part was affordability. After this came disrepair, with 35% of respondents reporting having problems with mold, damp, heating, hot water, and 25% having problems with leaks and drafts. The cost of heating is an increasing challenge for many people, and if you add the impact of poor quality housing, then the situation quickly becomes untenable. In terms of welfare benefits, the top area of inquiry, the number of disability benefits inquiries remains high and growing, with PIP consistently over 450 inquiries per month, and attendance allowance issues increasing significantly, up from 61 in June to 106 in October. I was just going to give a case study for Tim Speaks, an actual example of the impact of cost of living crisis on local people. Henry is 43 years old and used to be self-employed but can no longer work due to his having long-term health conditions. He's going through a divorce and now lives alone in a private rented property. He receives universal credit, but because he has a spare room, it does not cover all of his rent due to the bedroom tax. and he needs the spare room for his son to stay and after him occasionally overnight. His landlord has recently increased the rent of the local housing allowance. Therefore, he'd built up rent arrears of over £3,000, and his landlord was threatening eviction unless Henry paid £750 a month towards his arrears. Henry agreed to do this as he felt intimidated by the landlord and was also very anxious about becoming homeless. And so he felt he didn't have any option but to agree to pay. However, he didn't have the money. He came to us for help. He was struggling to buy food and pay his essential bills. He'd been borrowing money towards the rent arrears from his son, who was no longer able to help him. He was malnourished and frequently couldn't afford energy on his prepayment meter. And he felt that the basic necessities of life were beyond him, and he was extremely despondent. We gave Henry advice and support to maximise his income and added him to the debt respite scheme, breathing space, which gave him legal protection from his landlord from taking any action for up to 60 days. And during this period, we helped Henry apply for all the full benefits that he was entitled to, including discretionary housing payment, universal credit limited capability for work element, personal independence payment, water help, food and fuel vouchers, and the Southwark Emergency Support and Hardship Fund. We then helped Henry negotiate an affordable rent towards his rent arrears, and his landlord withdrew the threat of eviction. Henry no longer has to choose between food and heating and is better able to deal with the increased cost of living. He is, though, on an extremely thin margin before going into negative equity and remains vulnerable to further cost of living increases, as do many of the people we're currently seeing.
So we have also seen attendance at our last two cost of living support roadshows skyrocket, which is a sure sign of financial distress amongst our local communities. For those of you that don't know, these roadshows involve a number of partners working together to help people with money worries. At the last roadshow, for example, we provided 8 staff. The council also provided 8 staff from 5 different teams. And we were also joined by staff from the Latin American Women's Rights Service, Spring Community Hub, PCAN, colleagues from Age UK Southwark, and also Southwark Works and the DWP. So it was a real team effort. And these events are also a gateway to financial support that is available, for example, to the council's cost of living fund, which we think is very important, and to vouchers for people with prepayment meters that we're able to distribute. Now, before the pandemic, we would routinely help around 20 to 25 people at these events. And at the event we held in very early July, 16 people attended. But at the one in September, which took place at Surrey Quays Shopping Centre, we helped 52 people over a 3-hour period, which left us rather reeling, to be honest. However, fast forward to the November roadshow, which was at Inspire, just off the Walworth Road, and a staggering 115 residents queued for our help. It was quite shocking, actually, to see so many people so desperate for help. And it was a very exhausting session for the 25 or so staff from the variety of partners who attended. And of the people who attended, 88% stated that they required advice because they had no money, were struggling, were in debt, required financial support, wanted help with energy costs. The hugely growing number of people attending these events demonstrates very well the challenges many local residents are continuing to face with the cost of living crisis. And as Ross mentioned, we're looking to combine these events in the future with vaccinations, flu and COVID vaccinations. We think there's a real link between health and wellbeing related issues and money issues. So we're looking to explore that. Obviously, we need very large venues to accommodate the growing numbers of people who are going to be coming along in future. In terms of other ways that we're helping, just to end, we're very pleased to be working with the council to develop new projects that will target people that we think are most affected by the cost of living crisis. And that includes through the Southwark Energy Advice Service, which is launching this week, actually, and will provide targeted advice for people experiencing fuel poverty. There's also a new immigration advice service launching soon, which will target refugees, asylum seekers and other vulnerable migrants. And we're going to be working with Southwark Day Centre for Asylum Seekers to deliver that service. And our data shows that vulnerable migrants are a group that is disproportionately affected by the cost of living crisis. And then we also have the Private Renter Support Project, again funded by the council, which is creating a support organisation for vulnerable private renters in the borough, and actually has a new website, which we launched over the last week or two, which you should have received some information about. And then finally, in addition to that, we have a new 2-year project funded by United St Saviour's charity, which is just starting as well, actually, which will provide advice on benefits, debt and housing in Southwark food banks. And again, we've identified people attending food banks as being a group, if you can call it a group, which will disproportionately be affected by the cost of living crisis. And we're working with a number of partners on that project, including Brighton Community Fridge, Pecan, Spring Community Hub, and the Borough Food Cooperative. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's very informative. Thank you. So I'll throw it over to, I'll call on Councillor Lamb because I missed him out on the previous occasion.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. I have 2 questions. My first question is relating, can you please tell us how many people benefit from your services annually? And also, do you have a breakdown of the demographics of the same people who access your services?
Yes, it's just over 20,000 people last year, and we're on track to see the same number of people this year. And the demographic is the most vulnerable people in the borough, which is what we aim to do. We aim to reach the people who experience most discrimination and disadvantage. And it's more so than the borough profile. Significantly more people in social housing who have disabilities and typical poverty disadvantage indicators. That is changing with the cost of living crisis. The pandemic actually had an impact on that. First off, young people coming through. Anybody now is vulnerable, and people who've never had the need to come to us before are coming in greater numbers.
Thank you. Chair, can I just follow up? Do you have a breakdown of the diversity, the ethnicity, and so on of the?
Yes, it's been diverse, more so than the borough population, and it's a challenge for us with the numbers of languages that people come to us with. So we use interpretation services increasingly. We're seeing significantly greater number of people coming with immigration issues as part of a mix of their problems.
And when I say ethnicity, I mean, in terms of Black, Asian, and so on. I mean, do you have any figures around that?
Yes, we monitor client profile of everyone that comes in. We see that there's great diversity. And so we're doing outreach work as well. We're working with many different partners to ensure that we are getting through to the most hard to reach people. So we will go to organisations, to places where they're comfortable if they're not able to come to us, but we're well placed across the borough for people to come to us, and we're trusted. But we are not complacent about that. We're very much focused on the whole year.
The biggest change since July, since the last Assembly meeting, has been a big spike in the number of people who are disabled and have long-term health conditions. A really big spike in July and August, slightly reduced in September. It's something that we're going to closely monitor because it's going to have an impact on perhaps new services that we might want to develop to cater for that particular client group.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I have a question about funding. So according to figures that I've found, that the highest level for public funding for citizens' advice was actually in 2019, 2020 when it was at just over £900,000, and it then dropped to £720,000 the following year, which is quite, in absolute terms, even quite a substantial reduction. Where is it at now in relation to these figures? Have you seen a rise or a reduction, in particularly in real terms, with the current rate of inflation?
So the figures, I think you quoted not quite right. We did have a very high level of income in 2019-20 with some projects about to end and some coming in. So in that year, I think we were nearly 2 million, in fact, overall with different funding streams that we have. We get quite a bit of funding comes through our national organisation, Citizens Advice, for some of the projects, substantial parts from the council, and get a variety of funding from trusts as well and so forth. It has gone down. The year-end position for 21-22 was 1,700,000, and we have a deficit for the first time in many years of £40,000 at the year end in our published accounts. This year we're projecting a deficit of over £100,000. This is largely because of the cost of living impacting on us. We don't, with our different funding streams, have any that are building in inflation. Some of our funding has been rolled over, had contracts for 3 years that have been rolled over without cost of living. So that's a real cut. And we follow JNC pay scales. Our biggest expenditure, 75%, is on salaries. And we're in line with JNC pay scales, having to award a lump sum of £1,925 to all our staff, which is overall 5%, over 5% of our budget. So we are suffering from having to spend our reserves, the uncertainty about the future, with no guarantee that we're going to be able to attract the income to cover our expenditure at the moment.
Sorry, I should have been precise and said that it's I think that was the council funding that I quoted. Is that approximately right also for the percentage of council funding?
That year, that was exceptional because we picked up, there was another advice agency advising communities that became insolvent in that year. And so we took over some premises and their funding. That was then cut the next year. So we have a number of funding streams for the council with different projects. Our main council contract is £600,000 for the Generous Advice Service. It's currently £600,000, has been for the last 3 years. It's now just being rolled over for 2 years, but at the same amount. And so in real terms, that's a significant cut with cost of living going up.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, sorry, Councillor Johnson.
So it's just a quick question, picking up on your considerations about having vaccination facilities at future events that you're going to be hosting. Is that because you're finding in the people that are coming to you for help that they're not as that they're not vaccinated? I'm trying to understand, because I think back to the Age UK and they said 98% of people that are seeing them are vaccinated. I want to understand why it's a thing they're looking to do.
It was an approach from Public Health, actually, who felt that co-locating vaccination outreaches with our road shows would be a good way of picking up vulnerable local people who may not have been vaccinated. And in the past, we've kind of seen, that there may well be some links between kind of financial related advice on debt and benefits and housing, and health related information, help and advice that people need. So we responded positively to that response. There are links between, big links between, what we do and general health and well-being anyway. People being in debt there's lots of research that has shown that that has a very negative impact on people's health and well-being. So, I mean, we're going to test it at the next roadshow, which is on the 19th of January at Bells Garden Community Centre, incidentally. We're going to test how well that works, that co-location, but we haven't done it yet. It's very experimental, and look forward to reporting back to you on how it goes and whether we want to develop it more in the future.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and thank you for presenting your evidence, which is appreciated. And we'll move on to the next person, if you don't mind. Thank you. Okay, if we could now hear from Chris Williamson, the Head of Health and Wellbeing, please. I understand that you're going to make a presentation on the cost of living crisis and the impact on mental health and wellbeing. So fire away, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. So yes, I've been asked to give an update to colleagues on the impact of the cost of living crisis, specifically around mental health. So I guess just as context to begin with, we estimate there's around 50,000 adults in the borough who experience a common mental disorder, so the likes of anxiety and depression. And for many people, there's a genetic predisposition to mental health disorders and ill health, but for a lot of residents, these can either be the driver for mental ill health can be social factors, so housing, employment, and cost of living, to be sure. And that can be a driver to develop poor mental health or exacerbate existing mental health conditions. So the slides I'll touch on at the minute, I think just as context, a lot of this is based on evidence and research which is developed by bodies across the country. Where possible, we've tried to drill down to Southwark, but it's a very rapidly emerging picture, and we're constantly looking and refining the evidence we've got so we can update colleagues further in the future. So the first slide in your packs, just to give you some context, and I won't dwell on these because I think you'll have seen some of these previously, and colleagues have also touched on these in their earlier presentations. But in the year to October 2022, we've seen significant increases in gas and electricity prices, and also cost of food across the country. And I think one of the key things to bear in mind here is that it's those households with limited budgets which are greatly affected. It's probably no great surprise, but they also have limited scope to reduce their consumption, because a lot of these things where we're seeing highest inflation are essential goods, their food, their heating, and so on. While there is some support available nationally and locally, unfortunately, this will generally mitigate some of these impacts. It won't remove them in their entirety. And some of that support is obviously focused on specific population groups or based on certain eligibility criteria. So to talk about the link between some of these factors and mental health specifically, the following couple of slides just touch on some of those broader impacts the cost of living is driving. So to begin with, thinking about food security and nutrition, and some of the colleagues in their early presentations have touched on this. But we're seeing an increase in those who are unable to afford a healthy diet and a nutritious diet. But sadly, we're also seeing an increase in people across the country who are cutting back on the number of meals they have and the frequency they have, and in some cases going without food at all during the day, particularly some of those residents who have families. In terms of that link through to mental health, food insecurity is a driver of stigma and social isolation for, unfortunately, many residents. And some research from the northwest of England points to that impact through to physical and mental distress on people who are experiencing that food insecurity. There's also a link through in terms of transport poverty, so rising cost of fuel, particularly for those who have to travel by car, either through their work or for other factors, who are unable to reduce their travel expenditure. That can have an impact on their access to employment, healthcare, food, and friends and family, driving an increase in social isolation, unfortunately, for many residents. We also see an increase in fuel poverty, probably unexpected, not unexpectedly. A survey was done back in 2019 across London. We did an increased sample for Southwark. So it's not our most recent data, unfortunately, but it showed around 15% of Southwark respondents at that time could not afford to keep their homes warm enough. So pre-pandemic, pre-cost of living crisis, so we expect this figure to have increased fairly significantly since that point. The impact of a cold home on your health and well-being is fairly significant, particularly for older residents. You see an increase in cardiovascular illness and respiratory illness as a result of being unable to keep your home warm. There's also been some research from the Institute for Health Equity, which suggests around 10% of excess winter deaths are being driven by people or being driven by the inability to keep your home warm. The rise in debt and financial stress as a result of the cost of living crisis also has a significant impact on our mental health. So around a third, give or take, of those on universal credit have fallen into debt in the 3 months up to August, and so on a national basis. And that obviously has an impact on people's mental health and well-being and the distress that can cause. Sadly, we've seen evidence through previous financial crises about the link between financial distress and increases in suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts. We're not yet seeing that filter through into our data locally, but that is a concern. The other area where cost of living impacts through to mental health is around housing instability. So research by Crisis earlier this year suggested there would be an increase in homelessness with an estimated increase of around a third across the country. A lot of that being driven by both the cost of living crisis, but also the removal of the eviction ban that was in place during the height of the pandemic. Obviously, that housing stability and having a home that's warm, but also not overcrowded, is a positive thing for your mental health and well-being, and these are being impacted as we go through these coming months. So, in terms of those who have a mental health condition, so as I mentioned at the beginning, financial security kind of affect people with a mental health condition, but it can also enable those with mental health condition to not be able to access employment and so on for their future life. We are seeing that across the country, as I said earlier, an increase in suicidal attempts and thoughts. And there's also a disproportionate risk for those with mental health conditions. So those with mental health conditions are more likely to live in rented accommodation, where we're seeing significant increases in new tenancy agreements and the cost of those, and also more likely to live in poor quality housing at the same time. So one of the other groups which we wanted to talk about this evening was around children and young people and the impact of the cost of living on them. So there's been a wide variety of research over the last year or so from a range of agencies which looks at the impact of cost of living on children and young people specifically. One from Young Minds back in August indicated that around half of young people in England highlighted the cost of living as a major worry and cause of concern for them specifically. And those money worries increasing both anxiety and distress. And additional research there focusing on those aged 11 pointed that out. There's also an increasing body of research from a range of organisations which seem to be pointing to around a third of parents having concern about the impact of the cost of living on their children's mental health and well-being. So what's all this mean for Southwark? So a lot of what I've talked you through so far has been based on national evidence and research. We're working closely with colleagues across the system. As I say, it's a very rapidly changing situation, unfortunately. But the one thing I would say here is that the cost of living crisis is not affecting our residents equally. It's coming hot on the heels of the height of the pandemic, which exacerbated some of the inequalities we see in terms of health and well-being across the borough. Groups that are particular notes for Southwark and for colleagues around the table, those on low incomes but not in receipt of universal credit and other financial support. Areas around Faraday, Old Kent Road and Peckham wards, where we see our greatest numbers of households on low incomes. Also worth noting, there are pockets across the borough. It's not just that kind of central belt within the borough. We do have pockets of estates across Southwark. And also those with disabilities as well, where we see higher risks of fuel poverty. So just to kind of draw my remarks to a conclusion, in terms of what we're doing next, we're working closely with colleagues and partners across the system and with some of the colleagues you've heard from this evening to try and improve our understanding about what's happening locally, as well as using some of the national research. And we're specifically looking at how we can identify the groups where some of those impacts overlap. What we've seen during the course of the pandemic in particular is that many of those at-risk groups are the same ones where we see our highest levels of socioeconomic disadvantage, residents who are more vulnerable from their health outcomes. They're often living in the same communities. And we're aiming to pull some of that information together for an updated briefing later this year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's open to questions now from members. Marina.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I have to say, this is one topic that I think is particularly distressing, because it's like a vicious circle, because not only do many of these cost of living crisis elements contribute to ill mental health, but of course the other way around, people who are prone to ill mental health will also much more easily get trapped because they can't sustain employment, or they fall into poverty. So how can we in practical terms break that vicious circle? And of course we have talked about the cost of living crisis, but it seems to me that it is cheaper and has maybe a higher success rate if we also tackle provision for mental health patients, of which, by the way, I am one, having suffered from anxiety and depression. And luckily, I'm not one of the people who has the additional pressure of poverty, but I can only imagine how awful that must be. Now, I could not access mental health services within, I think, 8 months or so, because I was told that they're completely oversubscribed, and private therapy would cost me about £320 for one session. I have also not been able to access medication such as HRT because it ran low, as you may know. And many people cannot access it because it is still not available on the NHS. So they have to pay for very basic medication. What can we do to help at the council level? Of course, there is a lot that we can push our central government to do, but what would you think is the most effective thing that we can do now to break this vicious circle? Thank you.
That's a really difficult question, to be totally frank. There's a whole programme of work around South London Listens programme, which brings together partners from across the NHS, community voluntary sector and council colleagues, which looks to improve mental health outcomes across the whole South London, and Southwark's included within that work. Unfortunately, one of my colleagues from the NHS wasn't able to attend tonight to talk to some of that work. But I've been assured there's an action plan which was recently taken to an event, I think last month, which they're looking to bring forward early in the new year. I'm not able to give you concrete actions from that plan at this point, but we can certainly feed that back.
Okay, Councillor Cumber.
Thank you, Chair. A group that I'm interested in that would be a subset, I think, and in fact the point at which a lot of these would intersect would be young carers who might well be living with a parent who can't work and therefore is on a low income because of a mental health condition. Do we have good figures on that? Is there anything you could say about that group?
Sure. So data on young carers is often we rely on the census as a source of information for that. Thankfully, that data is starting to be released by the Office of National Statistics at the moment in kind of weekly tranches. The data on young carers specifically, or carers specifically, hasn't come out yet, but it will be coming out in the coming weeks, which will give us a good indication of how many do we have in Southwark who are providing unpaid care, where are they, and what does that population look like. So we will get better information on that in the coming weeks, I would hope.
Thank you. Councillor Ottery, please.
A question that might seem a bit hypothetical, but it'd be interesting to kind of get your perspective on where you might feel the silver bullet might be. If money wasn't an option, what would be the one thing that you would plow money into in order to address a lot of the issues that seem to be quite intersectional?
Good question. I mean, a lot of the exacerbations we're seeing around cost of living crisis are driven by the fact people don't have enough money. And that underpins a lot of those poorer health outcomes, not just that we see now, but we see amongst some of our most vulnerable groups to date. A lot of what we're seeing across a whole range of health and wellbeing issues is the underlying cause is poverty. So from that perspective, if you were being very blunt and very kind of frank, people having more money would be the biggest impact on improving their kind of health and wellbeing outcomes for some of those groups we've talked about.
Thank you.
It's always the poorest that gets squeezed the hardest. But anyway, Councillor Johnson.
Oh, sorry.
I saw Councillor Lamb first. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just curious. I saw the breakdown of those who are affected by the rising cost of living and so on. However, what I found missing, statistically, we know people from Black and ethnic minority are overrepresented when it comes to mental health. So therefore, why there's no information about that in this report?
Sure. So one of the challenges we have at a local level is getting good quality information around some of that intersectionality and that demographic breakdown, particularly because the picture's changing so quickly. It is one of the areas we want to improve our understanding of, and that's where we're working closely with colleagues across the system and working with the community knowledge sector as well to try and get that understanding locally. A lot of what we rely on at the minute, unfortunately, is based on some of that national research and so on to get an understanding. That's not necessarily representative of what's happening in Southwark, unfortunately, but it's the emerging nature of some of these impacts on health and wellbeing and physical health as well. So it is something we recognise and we want to improve on, and we're trying to be as nimble as we can to get that picture of what it means for Southwark.
And just a follow-up question, Chair, quickly. The information we have determines the quality of decision we make, and we agree that perhaps there's a need for a follow-up to capture those that may have missed in this report.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think certainly, kind of as I said, coming into the cost of living crisis, the pandemic exacerbated some of the inequalities we already saw in the borough, and kind of that's not unique to Southwark, but it's often those groups from socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, ethnic minority backgrounds, and so on, where we see the greatest inequalities and the greatest impacts of some of these factors.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose what I wanted to know is, do you look at crime data as part of this? Because obviously you've hit the nose on the head that a lot of the issues people have here is not having money. As you expect to maybe see that they might be people who might be turning around, and we've got young people with county lines or other bits and pieces and trying to make money to try and support their families. So are you maybe working with the police in monitoring their data, how it links up with your data, targeting those people that are doing those offences to provide them with the mental health support that they may need? Because, sometimes there's a punishment bit, but it might be, is it a case that you need help because there are wider issues that are affecting them? So that wasn't really here. So I wonder, is that work that you do?
So it's not something we've looked at to date in relation to the cost of living crisis. We have looked at the impact of crime on health and wellbeing more generally earlier this year, but not specifically through the cost of living work, but it is something we can look into.
Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Chair. Just to follow up on Councillor Johnson's question, I think if I understood what you just said, we've looked at the other way around. We've looked at the impact of crime on the health and well-being of people who suffer crime, but not on prevention, or indeed on people who have committed crimes and yet remain our responsibility as a borough.
Yeah. So the work we've done previously, we've looked at issues around violent crime and things through to the likes of hospital admissions. We're starting to look at work around knife crime and the impact on hospital admissions and emergency attendances and so on. Prior to the pandemic, we did a lot of work looking at youth violence and so on, and a public health approach to that. So there has been work we've looked at previously, but not specifically on the cost of living.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. And that's very much food for thought. So thanks again for your presentation. I now call upon Councillor Cryan and Dominic Kane to come forward to provide an update following on from our last meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, they're changing every room, these mics. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting me back again around that. I think we had quite an in-depth discussion around the cost of living crisis at the last meeting, so I thought I'd just sort of update you on what's been happening since, where we are on it as well. Excuse me, I can't read with my glasses on, so I'll be going to and from around that. I think one of the biggest things to note is that since we last met, we held our cost of living summit on the 8th of November, which was a really, really successful event. So it was an event where we invited people from the voluntary sector. A lot of the people you've heard from earlier were there as well, from our faith communities, from our tenants and residents and organisations, from our health partners, from schools, and brought everybody together for a day to discuss the issues that they're facing within their communities. And there were panels and workshops. We touched on things like employment support, heating costs. We had representatives from Shelter and Crisis there as well. We spoke about sort of the actual cost of living in general and cost of living fund. We did around education. We did around public health and wellbeing as well. And the feedback we got from that was actually everyone felt it was a very informative day. Actually, one person said that the borough that they live in held a cost of living event, which wasn't organised by the council. It was organised by the voluntary sector, and only one councillor turned up. So ours, we were over 100 people turned up in the day. We're now disseminating all the information and what people told us from that, and we'll be doing, like you said, we did, learning from that and feedback from that. But it was a really successful event, really well attended, and although obviously it's a horrible thing to talk about people struggling to make ends meet, it was a very positive meeting in everybody's willingness to do that. And I also just want to say, you know, I don't know if anyone else who's behind me now, but everybody who came up and spoke before me, we couldn't do this without them. You know, the council are doing what we can around the cost of living, but it really is a sort of partnership approach to this. And I think I just want to thank everybody who came before me to speak today for the work that they're doing, because they are making such a huge difference to our communities as well within that. I think that Tim's done what, and Chris done my thunder a little bit. We are launching the Southwark Energy Savers scheme on Thursday. So we'll be going over to Southwark Citizens Advice and formally launching that. That's a commitment that we've made. We paid £92,000 commitment to that over 2 years. It's about not only providing residents with support on how to save on energy bills, it's about looking at all the other support that is available and looking at income maximisation as well. So really looking forward to the launch of that this week and getting the message out that the Citizens Advice Bureau in partnership with the council have got this set up for people to access that support within there as well. We're also a very small thing that we're doing, but I think will be very effective. Every year we have a Connected at Christmas campaign, which helps support older people in the communities. It's run by and managed by United St Saviours, but as a council we fund it. So we've repurposed £20,000 from the Democracy Fund. There's quite a lot of money in the Democracy Fund. So we've repurposed £20,000 from that and £12,000 from the Common Purpose grants underspend as well. So it's £32,000 going to help some of the older people in communities, and that will provide things over Christmas like hampers and presents. It may even have sort of socially distanced events in that form, but United St Saviours, who have all the expertise in that, will be organised that. But it's very much something we wanted to continue to fund there. And I
Yeah, we launched the cost of living summit.
We did, yeah. So it's been a month, just give or take a few days, and we've already had just under 1,600 referrals. And of those referrals, because there is criteria, we've approved the support for 1,312
residents already. So in the space of a month, that's, you know, near 1,600 referrals around that, which really shows that it's really necessary and really needed around that as well. As I said, we continue with the cost of living fund around that's there, the Southwark Emergency Support Fund, which is now the cost of living fund around that. We still continue with our council tax reduction scheme, which is one of the most generous in the country to help people who are struggling with their council tax. During the half term, we gave a holiday meal support during the October half term, gave up to £220,000 in support for up to 15,000 children around that. And in the Christmas holidays coming up, we expect to give up to another £500,000 in additional support. We heard earlier about the campaign around uptaking pension credit. It's really important. Pension credit is one of the benefits that has one of the lowest, it's a really low uptake. And I think it's a lot of that is about stigma. A lot of older people feel stigma in actually claiming for benefits. But it's really important that people take that up, because a lot of the support that's coming from government in terms of energy support is reliant for older people, is reliant on being eligible and in receipt of pension credit. Therefore, we're stepping that up again. So we did a campaign in the summer, signing people up. We've now targeted, we've sort of recognised another 1,000 people. We want to do some targeting campaign on to see if they can sign up for pension credit as well, so they get eligible for £900 additional support around that, and also get the pension credit that they are entitled to as well around that. So there's quite a lot that's still happening. You know, we're not dropping off on anything on the cost of living crisis. It does remain our number one priority around that as well. So just wanted to give you a quick overview and an update of what's happened since we last met.
Excellent, thank you very much. They're all queuing up to ask you questions, Stephanie. So let's start in reverse order this time with Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Fred. I just want to ask two questions. My first one is, what proportion of our residents are digitally accessible at the moment in terms of accessing the science benefit? And also the other part of my question is, how are we ensuring that nobody is left behind among those who are not digitally accessible? Thank you.
Well, you've preempted the next item, Sonny, with the digital one, which I'll have to get another paper. And I think there are, I think it's 1 in 4 people, isn't it, that it said in the presentation we're about to give to you in a minute, are globally digitally excluded. And you're right, and I think a lot of those are older people and people from more vulnerable backgrounds and around that. So there is a lot of work we're doing to try and increase that, which you'll see in the next item around that. And yes, you're right, it is about everybody having access and that nobody gets left behind. So we're trying wherever possible to get that. I think the community referral pathway is a really good way of doing that, because these are organisations where it's not the people going to the council, because we know that a lot of people do have distrust of authority and the council. It's the organisations that are bedded in their community. So it's for schools, it's the faith groups, it's for TRAs, it's the community groups that they access and use who are the referrals. So they will do the referral on that person's behalf to ensure that no one's left behind. I think the problem is there will always be some people who are left behind because you can't reach everyone, but we want to try and make it as easy as possible for people to be able to access the support that they are actually entitled to as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, we've got the local support team who, as many of you will know, over many years have been operating to build links with the community. So we work alongside a lot of the partners that are here tonight. They're a trusted team that people often refer to. And as Councillor Crime was saying, to date, we've seen more applications. We've assisted 700 people in up to the first 7 months from April this year, which is more than the total last year. So there is there's a real need going forward. And we'll continue to support them through the cost of living work that we're doing.
It's okay. And I forgot to introduce Dominic as our director of the Exchequer, and he carries some very large keys around with him. For our coffers. Councillor Johnson, please. No?
I didn't have my hand up, but I do have a bit of a question.
I thought you meant.
I suppose it's not much about what's going on, because I think it's really great work in terms of trying to get the support out financially. And I think it's great we're trying to work with different community groups so we can identify those people in need. But I suppose longer term, what do we have in place to try and rebuild the trust in the community of the council and its staff, I suppose, because people are scared to maybe reach out directly. So there's like a longer term project. So are we going to start dealing with that as well?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think one of the key things with the cost of living crisis is working through the community referral pathway. So we understand that, we've got a dual role within the council. Some of it's collecting rent, some of it's collecting council tax. Often people won't come through to us because there could be a fear of us having access to information. So that's why we work closely with other partners to ensure they've got access to systems. So that's why we're pleased to see through the community referral pathway, we're starting to see an increase in the take up. Just last week, as Councillor Crine said, we've seen 500 people come through the referral pathway. And we'll see, it's getting colder, particularly this week, we'll start to see more people coming through, I think, over the next few weeks. And what's important to us is getting money out the door. And the challenge from Councillor Crine is getting money out the door quickly. Hopefully, you've heard from partners tonight that we can see that that's happening.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pollock.
Thanks. Good updates. Thanks very much. I want to follow up a question I asked you last time, see if there's been any progress on that front. So I asked you, I'll remind you, I'm sure it was a key action you followed up. I asked you, so you told us about the laser heating bill purchase for gas supply and the fact that it was the cheapest form of gas supply around in the borough. And there were people who were very pressured with their living costs that don't live in council properties, who are wanting to onboard onto that as a sub-customer, able to demonstrate liability, able to kind of cover the admin costs through a management charge. You mentioned that there's something to follow up with Councillor Merrill and extra people, so wondered what happened since then.
We have, I think, what we've been trying to do though with housing is getting the letters out to residents around their fuel costs, which has taken quite a while to do because obviously after the autumn statement and all the effects, so we've got that out, but it is still there, and I have raised it with Councillor Merrill, but it isn't my portfolio, Leo. So I did what you asked and I've raised it. It's now sitting with them to look at on that.
Maybe it's a Dominic question because it does come.
It doesn't sit with Dominic. No, it sits in housing.
Okay, do you talk? Or
yeah.
The offset.
It does sit in
to be
housing.
fair to Councillor Crine, she's been ensuring that the letters go out as quickly as possible. Those letters are now going out to both leaseholders and tenants. It was clear that there was a requirement for tenants to be written to at the same time to confirm that prices are fixed up to April 23. From there on, there's more of a challenge in terms of retaining price as it currently is, given the fact that we do buy on bulk, but clearly, like any other supplier, we'll be seeing increases being passed on to us as a buyer, albeit in bulk. Within the council. So there is a pressure going forward, and we'll do all we can to support both leaseholders and tenants. And that's part of the purpose for the letter going out, as Councillor Crine requested.
What Leo was talking about with people in not council, they're private blocks where maybe we own freehold of that block and they could just go onto that. I have raised it, is the answer, Leo, but it isn't in my gift. It's not my portfolio. But I have raised it and I will remind them.
Yes, I'm sure Councillor Merrill's watching this as we speak.
Everyone's watching it, aren't they?
Of course, absolutely. There's nothing else going on, is there?
As if Brazil were playing, is it?
Oh, that's beyond me. Councillor Altrade.
Yeah, my question is also in relation to a question that I raised in the last meeting relating to letters for the leaseholders around gas bills. I think all tenants and resident associations, me and my colleagues have been at, it's been raised at least once, if not many more times, by leaseholders who are unsure as to what they're going to be paying. Would it be threefold, fourfold, fivefold more than what they're currently paying? I think the last update you provided, you mentioned that we were part of a consortium, a meeting had happened to try and work out some complicated metrics because different district heating systems work in different ways, and therefore some are more efficient than others. The costs will be different for different estates accepted. But where are we on that?
The letter's gone out.
Okay, that's gone out
Yeah,
to
the
all
list has gone out
leaseholders.
to all leaseholders and one to tenants, which is what Don was just saying. So it has gone out.
When did that go
It
out?
didn't go out till last week because as I said, there was a lot of this because of all the different systems, then obviously the impacts of the financial statement as well, but it has actually gone out.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So leaseholders should start receiving it soon.
Yeah, I mean, some may have received the date. They went out last week. They should be received.
Great, that's good to
Dependent
hear.
on post strikes as well.
Very good
Yeah.
to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the one I was chasing up
Yes.
as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. That's good to hear.
Thank you. Councillor Cumbo.
Thanks, Chair. My question actually does follow on from that. So it's really good to have that update. What is it that when we get these questions from tenants and residents associations, what is it that we can work with them to do? Because very often people will approach them that haven't approached us, as well as vice versa. What is it we can be telling them to do in terms of referring people, steering people to support? Obviously, there's Southwark Energy Savers, that's brilliant, but what else?
So I think there's obviously the Southwark Energy Savers is the thing there. I think also in terms of if people are struggling, they really to talk to their housing officer. I mean, this is really housing related, not finance related. So I'm answering things that are not in my portfolio, just to let you know here. But always speak to housing officers. Obviously, the local support team are always there to help as well within that. One of the things we are doing tomorrow is we are taking the indicative HRA for budget is coming to cabinet tomorrow, and one of the recommendations within that is that we are going to from HRA reserves match fund the discretionary housing fund from the HRA, so it's double, it's about 800,000, so that therefore for any residents who are struggling with their rent payments around that, there is always a discretionary housing fund. It goes really quickly. By Christmas each year it's gone, so we're going to be topping that up through that to give that extra support around that as well. So there is support there. I would always say just ring up, obviously on the council's website there's a really at the very top of the website now it says you've got the Here to Help logo with the cost of living thing. Everything, there's lots of things in there. Community referral pathways as well. As councillors we can refer people through the community referrals pathway as well. That's another, that we can pick up as casework ourselves within that as well. So there's quite a lot of support there that you can navigate people around. But I would always say if anyone is struggling, obviously do the refer to community support pathway or refer to the local support team.
Yeah, just to support that. So SGTO, the second highest referrers into the referral pathway.
By quite some way as well.
Yeah, so it's a huge amount of referrals coming through. As I said earlier, likely that's going to increase. That's £100 voucher, which is immediate payment to post office payout voucher that they can take to the post office in cash for immediate support, as well as the additional support through CES, emergency support funds, if required.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, actually, and I am aware this might not be your portfolio, but I guess one of the problems with the cost of living crisis as an issue is that it's very hard to keep it within the parameters of one brief. I suppose what I'm really trying to get at is whether or not we're achieving as much join up as possible. And actually, I was wondering during Steve's presentation, it's a shame he's no longer here, as to whether or not, obviously you operate a service like the Albrighton Community Fridge. And it's not the kind of service where you ask people for direct details, but there is still going to be an obvious human ability to spot who's in need and where it would be helpful to be able to refer them to mental health services and so on. Are we doing all we can to reach out to community projects alongside TNRAs and anyone else to ensure that they're in a good position to help people to make those connections and get other help?
Yes, we do. We have a Community Support Alliance, which helps. It was set up during the pandemic, primarily at the time to give support to people who were shielding or, self-isolating around food parcels, picking up prescription, all that type of thing. So we have a Community Support Alliance who are still there and support people. We work within the voluntary sector networks around that, through communities around that to provide that support for them. We've got Community Southwark who help disseminate information down to the voluntary sector as well. We've got a really great Faith Leaders Forum, and they've recently had in this room a couple of weeks ago had an event which was focusing on cost of living and climate emergency as well. So they come together to look at how they can support people as well. So absolutely, we are getting that information out to the organisations and the community groups who help and support people around that. I think, as Dom said, SGTO have been really, really good. They they are the second highest referrer for the referral pathway as well. So the information is out there, and we try where we can. Roadshows, again, a really good way of getting those out. We're part of those roadshows. I know they're a really good idea, thing that's organised by Southwark CAB, but we absolutely want to be part of that and will continue to be part of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge amount of work, lots of coordination. Council officers, with a disproportionate small number of council officers end up doing presentations across a whole wide range of events, but hopefully we're doing whatever we can to pick up those events as best as possible. And as Councillor Cryan said, I think they're here to help is a very clear banner on the website, which helps us.
And I think you're right. Internally, I mean, it is something that crosses over every department. Though I lead on it, and Dom's the officer lead on it, we do obviously liaise with all the other departments around it, because there's work, obviously, we heard from Chris on public health that are doing the work that Evelyn's doing, Councillor Cota's doing on food insecurity and right to food borough around that, the holiday food and fun, the work that Councillor Ali does with children and schools around that, the housing side. So it all does come in together. So again, Dom sort of coordinates all the office of responses to this as well around that. So it very much is, it isn't silo. The cost of living it runs across the whole of the council and across the departments.
Hey, well, I mean, just picking up that last point, there does appear to be a lot of recurring themes across all the contributions which have been made this evening, particularly in regard to food, fuel, housing, health and incomes more generally. And it strikes me that, I'm going back to the point that Irina was making earlier about what the council can do and what the council is financially able to do. It strikes me that Southwark really is probably the hardest hit of all London boroughs in regard to these factors, given, as Sunny and others have indicated, the demographic profile of the council. So, it's almost like it's a perfect storm, which the center of the storm is here in this borough because it's having such a massive effect. And I think, in all the representations that we make, not just with our sister boroughs and various local government associations, but with central government, we ought to be making this point very, very clear. And we shouldn't diffuse the fact that what we have here in Southwark is so unique by diluting it with other authorities. We have a strong case ourselves to project and put forward to central government. And I hope, that we will be doing that irrespective of what other allegiances and alliances we may have with other authorities.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think not only do we're in a unique position, we also our response to it. And when you look around, I mean, I think there have been some very good responses from local authorities. A lot of local authorities not around this. But I mean, I think it's really key to bear in mind that we had the most generous cost of living fund. But we know we've searched the length and breadth of the country to see if anyone's got a better cost. But in terms of how much we're putting support towards it, around that, the work that we're doing in terms of some of our commitments around the energy savers response, around sort of the work that we're doing around food insecurity, through schools, we still are only one of 4 local authorities who fund free school meals for all primary school children. We're only one of 4, and we've been doing that for quite some time now, haven't we? For about 8 years around that. So, I think we absolutely continue to put our residents at the forefront of what we do, and the cost of living crisis, unfortunately, is going to be here for a while yet. I think the events on the 23rd of September with the mini budget have made it even harder for a lot of people. An hour's folly for, vanity project of ideology has just basically ruin people's lives, and not just people who are vulnerable, but people, my worry is, I think we know who the vulnerable people are. We know the people who come to us for support or to voluntary sector organisation support. We know who are people who are claiming universal credit or housing benefit. We know those people are. What we don't know, who we don't know at this moment in time, are the people who are just above that threshold, who are not eligible for benefits, but are going to be severely impacted by that, but will not have that support that's available because it's not there for them. And that is my biggest worry in that. And I think that's one of the things that I've tasked Dom and the team to look at is what do we do and how can we do that? And one of the things that said we have done is that additional money in the housing revenue account around that, because we know that there will be people who not entitled, who don't get housing allowance, but will struggle around that council tax support scheme. We will be continuing with that. So it's looking at the people who could fall through the cracks, so people we don't know yet, and maybe don't know what services are available because they've never need to use them as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for your contributions. And Brazil won 4-1, by the way. So there we are. Oh, I got my contact. Okay. Thanks very much. We'll move. You might as well save you walking backwards and forwards. Okay. So we'll move on to item 5, please. The digital strategy and customer access item. So if I can just say for this item, we have Stephanie back again as the lead member. We also have Dion, is it? Welcome. And Sade, is that right? Excellent. Jolly good. They'll be providing us with an update on how the council is ensuring that council services are accessible to residents and improving digital accessibility. Dion, I understand you providing us with a presentation. You'll be kicking it off. Is that correct? Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you.
We've got an ambitious programme that we're working on, and we're aiming to achieve that every Southwark resident will have the access to fast and stable broadband and a device and the skills needed. So the programme of work has been focusing very much on that connectivity over the last 4 years, providing skills to our residents and also supporting residents with devices. As you know, through the pandemic, a lot of people didn't have devices, so that was an area of work that we concentrated on. So as part of becoming a smart borough and supporting our residents, over the last 3 years, we've successfully connected 40,000 council homes, estate properties, and with an additional 60 community halls being provided with a free fibre connection. Southwark was also successful in getting funding to become full fibre network fund, and we've used that across the borough. We've also partnered with UK Broadband, now owned by Three, to provide wireless broadband services to upgrade aerials, improve services for residents. And again, there's been a 2 million agreement over 10 years, which will provide a wireless broadband offer in Southwark and income generation for the council. And we can talk about how we've used that money further on. I'm going to hand over to Sade, who's going to talk through some of the more specific programmes.
So in terms of increased connectivity, so we've put about 50 4G small cells across the borough. So that's led to improved connectivity across London Bridge, which had digital not spots. We've also focused on places like Tate, Borough Market, London Bridge Station, so places with high footfall. And then just in terms of the digital inclusion pillars, we're focusing on 6 separate digital inclusion pillars. So the first one is affordable broadband. So making sure residents can actually afford the broadband that we provide, whether that's through free digital hubs, so places like libraries, community centres, TRA halls, access to devices, jobs and training, so working with telecommunications providers to make sure that they're offering apprenticeships, internships and jobs. Digital skills for residents, so this focuses on basic digital skills, making sure that they have a My Southwark account, an email address, things like trust and safety. Digital resilience for businesses was around COVID and making sure businesses have an online presence, but that's been led by the local economy team. And then finally, digital education for all was understanding that digital inclusion is kind of a spectrum and you have people on either end, and making sure that digital education is embedded within everyone's lives. So just in terms of the digital inclusion initiatives that we've done so far, so over 90 community buildings have a free lifelong full fibre connection. So these are libraries, community centres, some sheltered housing, Southwark Works as well, and a few other organisations. We've distributed 1,500 free digital skills training guides. So that means that residents who want to can actually participate in self-learning. We also have a digital learning partner that provides drop-in sessions across the borough. So that's in churches, in schools as well. So residents that need to can receive face-to-face support. We raised about £400,000 in donations for the Laptops for Learning campaign. So that went directly to school children that didn't have a device during that period. And we also provided 54 free broadband connections through community fibre and hyperoptic to people that were struggling to get online during the pandemic. And finally, we've provided 230 free SIM cards as part of the Good Things Foundation National Data Bank. So this acts as a safety net for those that can't afford a broadband connection, and it's for 6 months to 12 months. Just in terms of the digital inclusion funding breakdown, so we've received word that we've actually been successful in getting this funding, and this money is going towards more digital skills guides to be distributed across organisations. We previously had a tablet lending scheme, so that's going to be rolled out across the borough. We'll also be expanding the routers distribution pilot. So we previously focused just on the Southwark care leavers, and that's going to be expanded to other digital exclusion personas. So people on low income, older people, people from the GRT community, people with disabilities, and a few other groups. We'll also have face-to-face training for housebound residents. So that was something we previously offered pre-pandemic, and it's something we're going to pick up again. And there's a number of other things. So staff to deliver the programme and a sustainability evaluation as well. And finally, before I pass on to Dion, in terms of the opportunities for Southwark residents, we want to focus on IoT technology. So IoT is Internet of Things, things like humidity sensors to improve health outcomes. So knowing when there's mold or damp in a certain home, understanding when residents have tripped or fallen so that their care workers can go in and actually help them, providing care packages, and then measuring air quality to improve people's health and reduce pollution, not population, sorry. So that's something we'll be working on next year. And I'm just going to pass on to Dion.
Okay, so part of the work we're doing is also around improving the accessibility of our website. So it means not excluding people that have disabilities from using the web. If someone has a visual impairment and requires a screen reader, then they need to be able to use that in, hand in hand with our website. It's a legal requirement for us to do this, but the benefits are far-reaching, as 4 out of 10 people need an accessible solution, and that's around 13% of our communities in Southwark who need this accessible and easy-to-use website. So part of the work we're doing is using the tools that will help us. We've got a number of tools that we use for this, so Assist and also Adobe Pro. So all new documents that are uploaded to the website are checked for accessibility prior to being uploaded. And we're also working on the historic documents. Part of this as well is rolling out the training to all of the employees across Southwark to ensure that we're using appropriate frameworks. So every service is able to use this same approach. So this is a programme that's been adopted by another council, and they've shared it with other councils. So it provides guidance and support to anyone to develop basic skills for digital inclusion. So it's a really key part that everybody in the community is able to use our website, as well as providing digital skills. So part of the overarching digital programme as well is looking at our website and redesigning that. We're making sure that accessibility is a core requirement. Again, removing documents where possible that aren't accessible to people, and we're looking at the functionality. But a real key part of this is working with our residents to ensure that they have input into this, working with people who have disabilities to get their feedback, and to make sure that the community has that impact. So there's a new If you look at slide 15, there's a new website design, and we can feed back on the final version. This is just some mock-ups that we've been talking to communities about. There's another aspect to this, and part of the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted that a number of our services need to work more with our communities around digital. And so part of the website design will be working with communities on initially the top 10 services to understand the frustrations with that process, how to make that easier. We're aware there's been broken links or there's been lots of pages. And again, the work that Sade does and her team going out to the communities to encourage advocates who work with our residents to be able to use the website so they can support people better. So that's working with our community groups, but also our key workers who go into people's homes so that they're able to then support people further. So that's the summary.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Stephanie?
Only that obviously it really is key. I think we I think the pandemic showed that people were more and more reliant on digital solutions, and when you aren't able to access digital solutions, your world gets a lot smaller and around that and as well. So I think it's really key that we look at that. I have to say, I've been around a while now, not so much you're in, but I've been around quite a while. And it's something, we've never cracked this nut, have we, in terms of the accessibility, especially around our website.
Mere youngsters, Stephanie.
We are mere youngsters. We were very, very young when we started, school children even. But no, the whole thing, about the website and having a website that works for residents, because it doesn't work for residents. It really does. And around that, but also the fact that going into the communities and supporting people in the way they want to be supported in this. I think, everybody's needs are different. Everybody's sort of abilities are different. Therefore, one size fits all shouldn't be the solution here. Yeah.
I've yet to come across a perfect website. I'm sure one exists somewhere, but the key thing is it's got to be accessible to everybody, or what's the point of having it? And then, the second thing is it's got to be relevant to why people want to use it. If it's totally irrelevant, you might as well put it in the Tate Modern. Councillor Newns.
Thank you. A quick note on the website. I have to say, having been a councillor for over 4 years now, I certainly haven't got the hang of it, and it's one of the most frustrating experiences having to remember which channel I went to get to a particular page, and having to try several times, and even then frequently not managing to get there. And I usually end up reporting these things and being told they'll be fixed, and then they aren't. So anyway, so good. It's great to hear that that is work that's underway. I'm conscious that so the issues I wanted to raise with you sort of relate a little bit, I suppose, sort of to the locality which I represent, which is not generally one which suffers from. So I'm Councillor of Dulwich Village Ward. It's obviously sort of in terms of a general digital exclusion, you wouldn't expect Dulwich Village Wards to be sort of particularly featuring. However, we do have a big problem with not spots, and in fact, most of Dulwich Village, the road. Sort of it is, I suppose it's quite low lying perhaps. Anyway, there are lots of areas where there is a real problem with access, and I'd be really interested to hear sort of what plans are afoot to improve that, and a little bit on sort of also sort of local themes. One of the things that we've had a problem with is with telecommunications infrastructure being dumped outside trading premises where it's been really unwelcome, and I understand that there is permitted development rights in some of these situations, but what can we do as a council really sort of to work with the telecommunications companies to ensure that they don't completely blight someone's small business, there is a case in my ward where that clearly is the case. There's a business called Umanayana on Croxted Road, Norwood Road Junction, where sort of there have been
I don't think this is a surgery, Councillor Newell.
So really, and there have been other instances as well. So I'd be really interested to sort of, hear also what we can do with that. And I do appreciate entirely, Councillor Wingfield, it's not a surgery, but it was an illustration of a problem that
yes, well, you could email, remember, yeah, thanks.
I'm happy to take that outside the meeting and respond if you, my name's on the meeting notes, so we can definitely address those specific issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irina.
Thank you very much for the report. 2 questions. What, maybe I've missed this, but do you have data on what percentage of residents in Southwark are effectively, for whatever reasons, excluded and I don't have internet access? And secondly, very concretely, when will the new website go live?
So Sade can go into more detail about the number, but it's actually 19,000 people excluded in Southwark. So the detail around whether that's skills, devices, or a combination of both.
19,000 people have no access to the internet at all, just in Southwark?
Yes, 19,000. So digitally excluded people, according to ONS, is around people that haven't logged on to the internet in about 3 months. So that's what we consider to be digitally excluded from the Office for National Statistics. So that's from 2020. 19,000.
Thank you. And the website?
Yes, so the website will go live next year. So we've just been working with residents on the design. We've got work to do with the service areas on content. So you'll start to see the different look and feel early next year.
Thank you. Councillor Pollock next.
Yeah, that's hot. No problem. My question was on security. So I know there's a real big push to get people online, which I think is very important, but particularly for our older generation, once they do come online or have smartphones, etc., they end up getting unsolicited text messages, emails, and having to acquaint yourself with that quite quickly can be quite difficult, even as a long-term user. Are you able to kind of talk about some of the work that you're doing to help our people who aren't included online, who are then included, to ensure that there's the right adequate support being given when it comes to security?
Yeah, so the drop-in sessions that we hold, it's typically one-to-one or a small group, and part of that is also like getting comfortable being online, how to be aware of scams and fraud. From next year, we'll be holding some fraud awareness courses, so not just for kind of older residents, but for parents as well, because typically they tend to get a lot of spam texts or spam emails. We'll also be running a comms campaign because about April, I think most broadband contracts will rise by about 16% on average. So again, we'll see a rise in scams with people saying, oh, actually contact us to talk about your contract. So we'll be running a comms campaign next year as well.
Okay, Councillor Pollock.
Thanks. I'm interested to know, so just a few quick observations, not necessarily questions. One is just around what role of a graphic designer you've had in your website redesign. I've always just felt the Southwark website it's, in terms of functionality, it's fantastic, and is really good. But compared to some other councils' websites that I go on, I don't think it looks as nice and is as kind of welcoming and as appealing as it might be. Just some small things that I just spotted here, but not necessarily. One bit was just over removing documents and addressing historic documents and whether they need to be there or not. Can I urge strongly against that? If that means sort of removing some obscure housing strategy from the mid-noughties or an estate strategy from the 80s, because I just want to confirm that that's not what's meant by that.
It sort of is, because there's now new guidelines you have to comply with all your website content, and if it doesn't meet that, you're told that you have to remove it now, and that's a directive that's come down sort of around. There are certain things that it has to tick, isn't it? I can't remember what it's called, it goes with P, doesn't it?
What is that guideline?
I can give it
Where's
to you.
that
It's got
from?
initials. So
It's initials.
Like,
very hard to remember.
the Gov
Yeah.
UK principles are really clear about documents that are in a different older format or were relevant under a previous administration or whatever. There's always just a note to say that on the page before you click into it, but it's good and important. It's there for democratic accountability purposes and institutional memory purposes, and that people should be able to access things from the past to help inform the present and future. So it'd be useful to know just what that guideline is.
This one, because I've got some casework about it last year, and I'll try and find it.
Okay,
Someone
yeah.
saying that
If
our documents didn't.
one of you able to work on this, that'd be great. And just a really great, you're looking at Internet of Things, and I'm conscious of the Great Estates team, some of the people who've left the council now actually since then, we're working on many fronts in terms of incorporating that into our housing stock. It'd be great to know kind of with some solid, solidity what we're looking to do on damp and mould going forward. And the other bit that I've been kind of crying out for, particularly in our ward in South Bermondsey, both of the district heating networks right now are not working in Central Estate and Rural Road Estate. It's unacceptable. There are thousands of people in homes that have no heat or hot water in the freezing cold. And we've regularly talked about having remote sensors throughout the pipework and in the plant room and elsewhere. So we don't always have to rely on this convoluted process of picking up data through the call centre when half the residents have given up, given it happens over and over. So on that in particular, are we looking to drive that into our district heating systems? Could save us a bit down the line.
Yes, so we're just in the process of working with the Director of Housing to identify how best to address that. We're working with the Lottie Network, and there's a London partnership where they've achieved quite a lot with IoT. So what we want to do is be fast followers and follow their lead rather than starting again and to prove those business cases. So we're actually just putting together a profile of the outcomes for residents as a result. So things like having leaves in gullies can lead to water going onto buildings, which can cause damp, and sensors can pick that up. And it sometimes is a straightforward thing like fixing a boiler in advance rather than waiting for it to break down and clearing leaves and things so that wet isn't pouring onto buildings. So there's a lot of things that sensors can prevent and support rather than residents then having to notify the council. So it's a completely different opportunity. Again, it's experimental technology. We do already, and we have built in the last 6 months, the data platform that's needed to host that IoT on. We've been working with children's and families to use that platform for predictive analytics for their services. So we've already got that technology. So I'm happy to share some of those areas with the committee when they're more developed, but we're working to identify what's going to be the best areas to work on. We've done a small trial on mould already, and that's been beneficial, so we're looking to roll that out into a series of pilots.
District heating systems in particular, given that the outage list is very long every day.
So I'd be happy for you to pass that feedback on. That's one of the areas that is there, but the more evidence we have to support that, obviously we're working with the housing team, but if there's specific areas or estates, if you want to feed that back to us, and we can include that in that information.
The regulations are the public sector's bodies accessibility regulation 2018, so PASBAR, for websites and mobile applications. I've sent you the YouGov page on what is and isn't allowed now.
And I've probably got a paper copy of all those historical documents at home. Yeah, you would probably share. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. If I heard you correctly, there are 19,000 residents digitally excluded at the moment. Coming back to my earlier question, what are we doing? Forgive me if you already said it, I miss it one way or the other. What are we doing to, to connect, to communicate to those who are now digitally excluded? And the other question, which is in terms of connectivity, I'm aware that Rutherhithe, for instance, residents do have issue with connectivity. Has that improved recently? If not, when should they be expecting improvement in connectivity? Thank you.
I'll take this and then Dion and Shadi can come in. Yeah. Well, my word's fine now, actually. No, so I think as Shadi said, we actually had we signed a wayleave agreement with Hyperoptic and Community Fibre several years ago to install fibre broadband on all of our council estates. For those estates with blocks, they didn't have a solution for single dwellings, like small estates with just low sort of houses around that. So we've got 40,000 homes now, council homes now connected to broadband through that as well. And in addition to that, 90 of our community halls, including many of our TRA halls as well. So we've got that connection there that people can access their own broadband. But again, if affordability is an issue, an option, there's obviously the TRA halls where they can use the free broadband in TRA halls as well around that. We were, prior to the pandemic, doing some training. Part of the deal that we'd had, the arrangement we had with Community Fibre and Hyperoptic was to provide training to residents and running workshops for people to get online. And I think it addresses that security issue as well, is that even before they got people to set up an email address, they went through security around things like phishing and scams and all of that prior to that around it as well. On that, we also trained up some community champions locally to do that. Obviously, then the pandemic happened around that. So as Sade said, we are now starting to start things up. We've received the funding, but we applied for to give that the tablet lending scheme to do more training in the community to pick up where we left off before the pandemic. So in terms of, I think that answers both your questions actually. The connectivity is better because of what we've done around that. We've also got, obviously, looking at sort of mobile sort of things like on lamppost 4G, 5G on lamppost areas. We did free broadband. It was Relish at the time on some of our estates. Also put an area on built so as mobile internet connection for people within a parameter around that as well. So I hope that sort of answers it.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, sure.
A question: how strong is our cybersecurity? Like, and I know in the past, like, really big businesses have had ransomware where a significant amount has had to be paid out for their website being taken over by, who knows, people from Russia, maybe. Are you able to confirm like how robust our cybersecurity is?
So we have that's all through. So we have a shared ICT service with Lewisham and Brent. So it's a tri-borough service, and all the things like cybersecurity and that are administered by the Brent side because they hold the contract to that. I was actually last week at the ICT quarterly board meeting, and we've had no attacks around that, cyber attacks at all for quite a while. There was a period of time about 4 years ago where we did have a problem with they didn't breach our security, but our systems went down because it was more that it was like if someone's trying to knock on your door all the time and it's sort of the door blocks it, but it also blocks the website. So we didn't get through to our website, but they were sort of trying to sort of batter it around that. Brent, the ICT service, sort out their game a lot on that, but as of now, we've not had any breaches at all, and the security that we the three of us jointly commission is so far has held up. Yeah, but it is an item on the standing item on the board meetings as well.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question about the how you are able to tell us about how you going to measure up the air quality to improve the people's health and reduce pollution in the light mostly of the schools and the parents who deliver the children to the schools, especially in the heavy congested traffic in the morning. Are we going to do run this of the software as is probably now, or you are planning to deliver the actual air quality measuring devices in the school? Thank you.
So we don't really, because schools have their own systems and that. This is more about our residents rather than the schools. The schools have their own digital strategies and their own, because they're their own entities as such, they're not the council. So we're responsible for the council's IT and trying to get connectivity across the borough around that. So I think if schools were to do that, they would need to do it themselves around that. We can do it for our residents. So some of the things we're looking around are things like damp and mould in our council homes, things like vulnerable people under adult care who are subject to falls and that. So it's things within the council's remit. Schools sit out, although we have a function with schools, schools have their own budgets and their own IT strategies and things that they do around that. So it would really sit with schools.
Okay, I think we're done. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Sorry for the wait. And Stephanie's still staying with us. Because the next item, item 7, is support being provided to Southwark LGBTQ plus communities. So could Jessica and Catherine come forward, please? Okay, welcome. Sorry to have kept you, but you'll be pleased to know as we're 2 members down, we would have been even longer if they'd have been here. So you're lucky, making a lucky escape. So we have Jessica Leach, who's the Community Engagement Manager, and we have Catherine Brownell, who's the Programme Manager for Sustainable Growth, who'll be providing updates on various aspects of support being given to the LGBTQ plus communities and the progress since we received a report back in July 2020. So who'd like to kick off?
So I think what we were primarily coming through today, because I know there are 2 items that were asked for. One was around the update on the LGBTQ plus community centre and the support around that, and the other one was around the equality framework. But I think the equality framework we're doing the audit on, and we're going to come back at a later meeting for that one. That's so today is more primarily around the update on the Bankside Yards plans for the LGBTQ plus community centre around that. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine, who's been working on this, just to give an overview of where we are. I think quite a lot of progress has been made on it. It's quite exciting. We're actually at a stage now where Native Land, who are a developer, are now putting together a panel which they've asked me to sit on to choose the operator for the for this centre around that. So I think this is quite timely coming here today, because if there's any asks that Scrutiny would like for me to look at when I'm doing the interviews, I'm more than happy to take those on board. So I think it's quite a timely, given the fact that that panel is just about to be set up and we're going to start in the new year doing those interviews.
I've got a little short paper. There is some illustrations of it, Everton, if you can put it on. But anyway, I'll just go through it. So there's 2 parts to this. The first part is the Bankside Yards LGBTQ plus community centre. So as part of the emerging development Bankside Yards, a developer Native Land is delivering a new space for the LGBTQ plus community centre. The Bankside Yards mixed-use development adjacent to Blackfriars Rail Bridge comprises 8 new tall buildings across a range of heights up to 50 stories, the restoration of 14 rail arches and a public space, which includes a section of the low line. Planning section 106 provisions include circa 70 million off-site affordable housing contribution, as well as space, which is 2 of the rail arches comprising about 5,000 square foot for a new LGBTQ plus community centre. The LGBTQ plus community centre is intended to provide a safe place to meet and socialise, promoting both cultural and wellbeing initiatives for the LGBTQ plus community. It's anticipated the space may include 1 or more of the following: exhibitions and performance spaces, events, workshops, retail, food and beverage. The space will be delivered to Shell Core and let on a 25-year lease to a suitable operator. Completion date of the construction works is Q3, so the end of 2023, allowing a period of time for the fit out. It's expected that the centre would open early to mid-24.
The procurement of a suitable operator is a priority for the council and the process being monitored through the council's performance plan. Sustainable growth officers are working closely with Native Land and its consultant, Canada Consult. And the first stage of the process, which was targeted for Q3 2022, i.e. now, is in train. So a draft ITT is in place and the evaluation panel's members confirmed, and they comprise representatives from Southwark, Council, LGBTQ plus, the Southwark LGBTQ network, GLA, and Native Land. The ITT is open to suitable LGBTQ plus organisations who can demonstrate strategic vision, resources, and experience to deliver a positive, relevant, and dynamic community offer at this locality. The panel will assess proposals on a range of criteria, including the benefit for the LGBTQ plus community, wider social value, and suitable business plan. The price evaluation will include rent offsets for the cost of the fit-out works, which are expected to be circa 1 million. The evaluation will be weighted 60% quality and 40% price, and the assessment will be through a written proposal and an interview. The selection process is programmed to conclude in mid-2023. So that's that big new facility. But also as part of the update on the Hopton Street unit, just adjacent actually. So that's the LGBTQ plus centre, so a slightly different name. Property Services, that sits on this 5th floor as well, and is undertaking the letting of 60 to 62 Hopton Street in SE1 to London LGBTQ plus centre. Initially, the centre occupied these vacant shops on a pop-up basis, starting in November 21. It was subsequently agreed to secure the centre's long-term future, and this is now a well-established location by granting a 5-year lease. The premises has provided a successful and well-regarded base for the centre and a platform for partnering directly with other LGBTQ plus charities, community groups and institutions local to Southwark, including Near Neighbours, Tate Modern and Living Bankside. The centre, so yes, those are the images for the Bankside Yards one. And the centre reports that it welcomes more than 1,500 visitors every month and runs a large programme of events ranging from regular programme, which includes free yoga, meditation, book club, film club and sexual health screenings, to special events including an LGBTQ plus climate summit, a Queer Women's Day and community pride meetups. These events have been attended by more than 4,000 visitors. Negotiation on the 5-year lease is almost concluded and is expected to be completed this month. Officers continue to be receptive to discussions with the London LGBTQ plus centre about their future in Hopton Street, and the development of the new Bankside Yards LGBTQ plus cultural centre takes shape. So
okay, thank you for that. Can I just ask? I mean, is it? What are we working towards here? Because is the expectation that the centre at Hopton Street will move into the Bankside Yards, or is it that we'll have we go from 0 to 2 such centres?
The first part of the question I can answer, and maybe Jess can answer the second part. The Bankside Yards facility is much bigger than the Hopton Street one. And that's why the business plan is a big part of the evaluation process, because it will need an operator that can demonstrate the sort of experience and capacity to operate a much bigger facility. The current thinking I understand is that the Hopton Street organisation, London LGBTQ plus centre, wouldn't have the turnover and isn't big enough to operate that space, but they might go into a partnership with somebody else to apply for it, but it's not a given, no. Yeah.
No, I was just clarifying what the end objective was here.
Yeah, and just to second that, I think it would be too big an ask for the organisation that's currently in Hopton Street at the moment. But I think there are some views about potential for a consortium bid that might be successful around the bigger space.
Fine. I was just clarifying that point. Anybody else got any questions on this item?
Specifically or in general?
Well, you can ask whatever question you want as long as it's relevant.
Thank you. No, I just not in relation to those two centres, but a more general question on support for the community. So you may be aware that Stonewall compiles a yearly list of the top 100 inclusive employers, and I know Southwark Council has said in the past that they aspire to be on the list. I think they're still not on that list. So the question is, particular to Councillor Crine, will you set that process in motion, and are you still aspiring to become a Stonewall top 100 inclusive employer?
I don't know where we are on it, so I'll have to check with HR, who aren't here at this meeting, because that's more of a workforce question, which does sit with me. But yeah, so I will take that away and find out.
Thank you. Councillor Cumber.
Thanks, Chair. I have two questions. The first one is obviously I don't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good in any way, but obviously I do notice as a councillor in the south of the borough that both of these areas are in the north. Has any thought been put into bringing a similar level of provision further south?
I think this was more around, obviously, the reason is we managed to secure a centre as part of the planning process. Unfortunately, we don't get big plan. Well, or fortunately, we don't get big, whatever you look at it, we don't get those big planning applications in the south around that, what's needed. I think there's something we could ask at the interview stage around outreach and how you can reach to other parts of the community and other parts of the borough, actually, because I do know that not everyone's going to want to travel to the north of the borough around it. I think it's terms of what we were looking for and what facilities are available. It's taken quite a while to get to this site, actually, around that. But I do think there is but you make a really valid point about how can that, how can there be opportunity for everybody around that. So I will put that on my list of things to ask when I do the panel.
Thank you. And my second question, actually on a similar theme about making everybody feel welcome, does actually relate to that. So that you very kindly made, I was going to take you up on it. Just on the question of procuring a suitable operator, I wonder about whether or not it's worth considering somebody who's got a vision around those issues that are quite contentious within the LGBTQ plus community itself. I'm thinking, for example, the debates around self-ID. It seems to me as though it would be good to ask providers whether they have a view on that and how they would negotiate those tensions.
I will pick that up. As I say, I don't think we're doing the interviews for a while, but I'm quite looking forward to doing them, actually. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, Councillor Johnson.
I don't think I suppose I've picked up on the bit where it says the provision to include roughly £70 million of off-site affordable housing. I don't even know how to answer it, but do you know where this off-site affordable housing is? Just, I live down the road from this site, and obviously affordable housing is not something that is regularly available.
So normally it would go into the council's own council home building programme. It would just go into the programme and then helps fund the council building schemes. Sorry. So that money they give in lieu would then go into the council's house building programme. Yeah.
Councillor Pollock.
Just a quick question about whether in the interview process and evaluation you'll be testing the operator's commitment to an international mission around this, given, obviously very prominent issues at the World Cup and elsewhere. That would seem like a good base to kind of have the stuff from.
So I have no idea what the question. I mean, whether I know at this moment in time, I don't even know who my fellow panel members are. I just know I was asked last week if I'd be honest. And yeah, but absolutely, that's why I said at the beginning, I'm welcome any things that you guys here would like me to bring up around it. And I absolutely think that is a really valid point, given, you know, it's on the world stage at the moment around that, you know, I think we all have our views of the fact that why was the World Cup there in the first place, but it is, and I think it's really important to shine a light on this as well. So yeah, and I think there is a whole role about internationalism.
Marina?
I'm sorry, but Councillor Pollock just reminded me of another question with regard to international engagement. Is Southwark Council involved in any way in twinning arrangements with cities or communities in Poland? I'm asking because you may be aware that there is an attempt, not just in the UK, but also in other countries, including the Netherlands and Ireland, to use twinning projects to exert some pressure on Polish communities not to establish so-called LGBT plus free zones. And is that something that Southwark would be interested in?
So my understanding is it's whoever's the mayor then will decide who they want to twin with and make those arrangements. It's a mayoral function, isn't it, around the civic office rather than...
Yeah, so we're currently twinned with Clichy and a place, Langenhagen, is that? A place in Germany, but I don't think there are any plans to extend the the commitment around twinning.
And just because it is often also a method of encouraging positive impact in twinning cities. So I'm just saying this is one of the options where councils can have an impact.
I think it's probably something to ask Mr. Mayor. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. I think we've reached the conclusion on that item. So thank you for coming along again. Sorry for the wait. Well, yes. Okay. Well, yeah, I do know him. So, what was I going to say? You're quite welcome to stay for our next item because it concerns you mainly. Yeah. No. Item 8 is the work programme. We've got 3 meetings coming up in January, all concerned with the budget. So the first one is on the 11th, when we will be hearing from Stephanie, who will be giving just a review on what the settlement has been before Christmas, announced by the government. And then what else have we got on there? Everton. So we probably have the HRA as well, which will be Darren.
Yeah, Councillor Merrill.
And we're still waiting for information on the Climate Emergency Fund as well, aren't we, for that meeting, Everton?
If it's in the chair on this.
Okie dokie. Okay, fine. And then the council delivery plan, hopefully we'll have some information on that too. And then at the end of January, we'll have the daytime meeting on the 23rd, where we will interview each cabinet member on their proposed budget proposals. And then the following day, we'll make recommendations to go back to the cabinet on those proposals or discussions on those proposals. Okay, everybody clear? Yeah, you can go. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, fine. Okay, so so we're scheduled to meet on the 11th of January. So in the meantime, wish you all a happy Christmas and have an enjoyable New Year. We've got plenty to do when we get back. Thank you all. Good night. Bye.